Good evening, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and fellow learners here at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. A warm welcome to all of you for this evening's dialogue session with Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Now, if I may, could I invite you to please put your mobile phones on silent? You're welcome to tweet according to a hashtag that's up on the screen. There will be a recording of this, and it's important that your mobile phones do not go off and disrupt the recording. For those of you in the back who might not be able to see, the hashtag is #4IR, for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Unfortunately, there's no question and answer formal session here this evening, but as you know, there will be an hour afterwards of reception, and Professor Schwab will kindly be circulating at this reception, so please save your questions for that. Now, I have the pleasure of opening the session, making a few words of introduction, and then engaging in a dialogue with Professor Schwab. My name is Danny Quah. I am currently Professor of Economics and International Development at the London School of Economics, but soon I will be Lee Ka-shing Professor here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. To say just a few words of introduction, there might have been a time mere decades ago when the name Davos was known only to its permanent population of only 11,000 people, a hardy group who had chosen to live there high up in the Swiss Alps. Well, okay, I lie. Davos might also have been known to skiers and to aficionados of the game Trivial Pursuit as the highest town in Europe. Today, however, Davos is known to everyone. It is where the annual meetings of the World Economic Forum are held, the international organization for public-private cooperation, the organization that's committed to improving the state of the world. Now, at this point, I might have asked Professor Schwab to say a few words about the World Economic Forum, but he will be too modest in his description of it. So I'm going to do it. Every year in January, presidents, prime ministers, secretaries of state, chancellors of the exchequer, Nobel Prize winners, journalists that you see every day on TV, programmers, founders at software corporate giants, in other words, people who now need only first names, like Bill, or Jack, or Mark, or Angela, or Angelina. People who need only first names gather at this to discuss the great issues of the day. And what happens at Davos at these meetings is then both touchstone and predictor for the critical issues that will engage world politics, international business, and the global economy. Davos helps shape the global agenda. And through the World Economic Forum's fellows and young global leaders and its entire range of participants, Davos reaches out and helps change the world. Now, having become so successful and so central, it is a measure of the success of Davos that it has spawned both progeny and cheap imitation. Anything that comes close to having aspirations in the same direction, or attendees who inhabit the same global cultural space, will be quickly tagged China's answer to Davos, or Davos in the Middle East, or Asia's Davos. That is the kind of place that Davos occupies in the cultural mind space. And with us this evening is Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. He is the powerhouse energy and the force behind and the intellectual center of the forum. From his having been one of the youngest ever faculty members at Geneva, he has taken his research and his writing on corporate responsibility towards the largest possible multiple stakeholder on our planet, the planet itself. And he has helped young leaders throughout the world engage in global decision making. He has built specialized communities for addressing social challenges. Now I'm going to start with asking some questions that allow him to perhaps expand on his own vision of the World Economic Forum before we take on the fourth industrial revolution. But let me just take 30 seconds more to say one word. My own experience of what I've seen Klaus perform in Davos is something that you see replicated every year there. One moment, he is quietly in thoughtful conversation in a small group. The next minute, he's sitting in front of 2,000 people in conversation with President Bill Clinton or Prime Minister Wen Jiabao, exchanging reflections on Adam Smith's writings, not from The Wealth of Nations, but before that, on America's real attitudes towards its global allies and the current system. We are pleased and honored indeed to be able to welcome Professor Klaus Schwab to the Lee Kuan Yew School this evening to speak in the first instance on his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, but then also to engage more generally on his views on the challenges ahead of us on global governance. The theme of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, many of you will know, is what galvanized this year's annual meeting of the World Economic Forum at Davos. Professor Schwab.
Thank you very much, Professor Quah. It's a great pleasure to be here because first I recognize in the audience some familiar faces, and second, it's a pleasure to be at the school which is named after one of the people who impressed me most in my life. Actually, I have met practically every leader in the last 40 years. And there were only 3 or 4 leaders who really made a lasting impression on me and to a certain extent changed my thinking. And one of those was Mandela, another one was my teacher at Harvard 50 years ago, Professor Henry Kissinger, and one was certainly the great statesman Lee Kuan Yew. So it's a great honor to be particularly in the school named after him. Let me just say some words about the forum, and I put it into the context of my own academic career. Davos, or the World Economic Forum, is built on a narrative. I wrote in 1970 a book which was called Modern Management. So it's many years ago. And in the book, my first chapter actually is focusing on what is the purpose of a company. And I developed at that time what is now called, and I probably documented it for the first time, what is now called the multi-stakeholder theory, which means that leaders, business leaders, should not only serve shareholders, the traditional shareholders concept, but should serve all those who have a stake in the company, which means employees, which means the government, clients, and so on. So that was the origin, and that was why I devoted my life at the end to this multi-stakeholder concept. Now, over the last 40 years, this multi-stakeholder concept has developed like everything which is globalized. I would say we have now also a global multi-stakeholder concept, which means we do not have a global government, and we certainly will not have a global government for many years to come. And I don't wish to have such a government. But if we want to address the big challenges in the world, governments alone cannot do it. Business alone cannot do it. Civil society alone cannot do it. So we need collaborative efforts. And business leaders today are themselves stakeholder of our global commons. So it's now how shall I say, a micro stakeholder concept where business has to serve its stakeholders, and it's a macro stakeholder concept where the business itself has to fulfill its responsibility towards the world as a global corporate citizen. Now, the World Economic Forum, of course, you mentioned Davos, is built, that's our flagship. But today it's much more than Davos. Of course, Davos is the meeting place of the most of the stakeholders of the world. But in addition, what we have built in the meantime is a great capability to generate strategic insights, because I perceive the forum as an organization which has to prepare the world for the future. But it's also an organization when you want to have legitimacy today, you have to deliver. So the World Economic Forum, just to give you two examples, we are engaged in about 50, 60 different initiatives at the moment. And one initiative is called Grow Africa, where we work together with governments, business, and farmers, and local organizations to revolutionize the supply chain in agriculture in Africa, to make it more efficient, to make it more green, if I may say so. And this was so successful that it mobilized until now over $10 billion of commitments and over $2 billion of investment. And this initiative, which is one of our 50 initiatives, has been replicated on an Asian level. And actually we have now in Singapore an office which is devoted to the same concept, but in Asian countries. Or another initiative which we are running, which may be of special interest for this region is we have a tropical forest alliance where we bring together governments and businesses like Unilever to see how tropical forests could be better preserved in a strong cooperation between business and governments. So just to give you the range, it's now 600 highly educated people located around the world, particularly in Geneva, where our headquarters is. So that's the forum. Now we have been, I'm sorry if I take along with my introduction, and we will certainly follow up in the discussion afterwards. Based on what the forum is doing and based on its important role in fostering public-private cooperation, we have been acknowledged as an international organization by the Swiss and other governments, which means we have today the same status as the International Red Cross, for example. Now, being very successful, but having this new status, we asked ourselves, how can we serve the world even better? And when you look at global governance today, I think we see two major deficiencies. The first one is that governments, maybe with the exception of this country, is very much engaged in crisis management. Just look at Europe, how much time is now used to meet the challenge of Brexit. And if the Brexit vote prevails for 2 years, nothing will happen in Europe because all the energies will be absorbed by managing the exit of England. Just to give you one example, I talked recently to a friend of mine who is a finance minister in Europe, who told me he has been in 54 meetings dealing with the euro crisis with Greece. So nobody is really devoting sufficient time and sufficient energy around the world, maybe with the exception of this country. So you have to be very proud of it. I was this morning, I was looking at what is done in Smart Nation. It's remarkable because it's really looking forward. And when you look forward today, you have to take a systems approach. It's not one issue anymore which you can solve. You have to look at the whole system. Otherwise, you have a silo approach. And that's the other thing which is happening in global governance today. It's too much a vertical and not a horizontal approach in problem solving. When I look out of my window in our headquarters in Geneva, I can look across the lake and I see the World Health Organization, I see the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. They all work very much in a silo perspective. But actually today you have the merger of big data, of informatics, if I may say so, with health. And I could give you many, many other examples. So the forum is becoming now, if I look at the future and our role in the global governance system, we will concentrate much more on systems design for the future. Like Singapore is doing so on a more national level, we are doing it on a global level. So we have defined 15 key systems for the world. For example, the future, shaping the future of digital industries, shaping the future of the financial and monetary system, shaping the future of health system, shaping the future of socially inclusive countries, shaping the future of education, and I could go on and on to enumerate the fourth. But the second, let's say, approach we are taking, what is missing in the world, is, and how we position the forum, is to be actually the software architecture for global cooperation. So we have those 50 initiatives, but to allow other organizations, and we had, for example, preliminary discussions now with the World Bank, OECD, and so on, to allow other organizations to put their own projects on our platform to create a much better cooperation. And for this reason, you may be interested, we even have our own team developing artificial intelligence, because when you look at global cooperation, to make a final remark, it's completely outdated. How does it function? It functions in a very analog way. You have meetings, then you create commissions, you have reports, then after a year you have again a meeting. That's ridiculous in the digital age, because the digital age allows us to supplement, let's say, the meetings which you absolutely need to create a atmosphere of confidence and trust. But with digital means, you can have access to the latest knowledge streams. You can make a dialogue much more sustained. So that's how, sorry to have been long, but that gives you the picture. And now the final note, when I say the world has to work together, I think we all underestimate the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. This will be, apart from, let's say, geopolitical developments and so on, this will be the big challenge of humankind in the coming years.
Thank you very much. No, that was a much needed and much appreciated statement of your view of the world. I think right now there's a danger that so much of the narrative out there, whether from journalists or political leaders, is one that takes a form of, sometimes people think of it as offensive realism, that changes in the world will be constantly met with only conflict. And your vision of how we need to construct architectures for cooperation are greatly valued and very much needed. I would like to come back to your large vision of geopolitics, but I also want to act as a little bit of a friendly critic on the book, because I think everybody should pick it up and read it, and I would like to ask you some questions that will help people get into the book, if I may.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Okay, so when you say the fourth industrial revolution, some people might say, wait, what happened to numbers 1 through 3? Because for some people, we might be thinking, we haven't worked through properly the previous industrial revolutions. Now, who might these be? Well, when we open the book and we say, and we read that, yes, well, the first industrial revolution, the one that began in England, had steam and power. It was about people manipulating hard materials to make things more efficiently and better. And then from there, we progressed through electricity, mass manufacturing, computers, and the fourth industrial revolution is about ubiquitous and mobile internet. It's about sensors that are small and powerful. It's about artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's about information and technology integrated into the very fabric of our everyday lives. And there are all kinds of magnificent, awe-inspiring spillovers that you describe in your book. The gene sequencing, nanotechnology, renewables, quantum computing, 3D printing, all of that's very attractive. But as you also describe in other parts of the book, whatever changes we have going forwards that have a hope for building this cooperative global architecture needs to be inclusive. It needs to bring everyone along. So I suppose my first question, that of somebody who wants to pick up the book and say, where should I go look? Where should I go look how you make the fourth industrial revolution inclusive? How do we get the 7 billion people on Earth who today, still over 1 billion live on less than $1 a day, 17% of the world have no regular access to electricity, much less the internet, much less smart sensors, much less desktop computing or smartphones or embedded devices. What is your vision as we go forwards building this global architecture to bring the fourth industrial revolution to everyone?
So three challenges. The first one you mentioned, it is a fact that 1.4 billion people have not yet access to the benefits of the second revolution, which means electricity. And about half of humankind has not yet access to the benefits of the third industrial revolution, which means access to the internet, to broadband, or even to not so broadband communication means. That's my first comment. So, and we are facing a fourth technological revolution, which comes at a much faster speed compared to the previous revolutions. Just imagine if, apparently, if you take all scientists and all people, technicians and, or let's call it technology and science-oriented people who have been working on Earth since the beginning of humankind. Half of those is still alive today and is working today. Now, if you imagine that those people are better connected and have access to all the knowledge existing in the world, you can see the drive behind technological progress today. So my second point to answer your question is, one of the issues I see is that people are not able to cope anymore, even intellectually, with all the changes. How do you absorb what's going on. I consider myself to be one, based on my profession, certainly, maybe also on my age, to be one of the most informed people. But when I did the research of the book, I learned so many new things, and actually the world is so much developing. I started to write this book in last September, and I wrote it in 4 months. If I would write it today, I could add already a lot of new developments. A year ago, I had to explain even to a banker what fintech is. And today, I mean, every bank which wants to survive has to look into it. So my concern is when we look at the gap and see as a consequence is that this is a very disturbing progress for many people, and they just feel overwhelmed. And you develop some kind of a bunker mentality. You say, why not my little small world? And this creates a kind of tendency of egoism, maybe even nationalism, fundamentalism. You want to go back to the old world. So that's my second answer. My third answer is, and it's related to what I just said, the speed is so fast, and we can only speculate. One of the speculations is that about half of the jobs in the United States, a highly developed country, is threatened today to be replaced in the next 10, 15 years by artificial intelligence, robotization, three-dimensional printing, and so on. And that's, for example, also certainly one of the reasons for the success of presidential candidate Trump in the United States, because so many people are afraid to lose the job. And I would say today we are in a global situation where we can nearly distinguish between an elite population, which will have the benefits of all this fourth industrial revolution. We have at the upper end, and we have at the lower end the what you would call in the traditional language the proletariat, which means the people who just have Uberized work opportunities. They work on demand to a certain extent, like Uber drivers. And then you have the middle class. And the middle class is threatened because there's a constant fear to fall down. And some people call the middle class now labor rate, because they still have fixed jobs, but they are under constant fear to fall down to the proletariat.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this around to jobs as well, because, you know, in the vision that you've constructed for us this afternoon and the conversation that we're having now about jobs, a lot of it turns on economic performance. You know, as you go forwards and we talk through a narrative for constructing an architecture for global cooperation, we need to be mindful of, say, what's happening in Europe today. You've already referred to Brexit. You know, from 40, 50 years ago, an attempt to build a regional architecture for cooperation with all the right ideals. You know, we agreed. Robert Schuman early on said what we needed to do was build a community that would make war not just materially unthinkable, but we would make war impossible. And we see happening this very week, the United Kingdom taking a Brexit vote that, first of all, denies that history of a regional cooperation architecture, but driven by the kind of populism that you're worrying about now. And some of this turns on the fears that people have about the jobs that they will be able to get into. And in a way, although you bring us these optimistic views, when you talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the sensors and the artificial intelligence, people are afraid because they say it's fine for those who go work on the Google campus. Right? You put on a t-shirt, cut off jeans, you've got free soda, there's soft furnishings, you ride your unicycle every afternoon. But for the rest of us, we can't code. What should we do? Now, in your World Economic Forum in ASEAN just a few weeks ago, you talked about the shortage of human capital. So do you see the human capital problem, the lifelong education problem? How do we deal with that at the same time we deal with these possibilities for regional and global cooperation?
You raised two questions which I want to address. The first one is Brexit, and actually I believe that we will have a no, and as UK will stay in the European Union. Let me explain why. It's a very interesting phenomenon. I was born just before war. I grew up in Germany, and for me Europe was a very emotional issue. It was no war anymore in Europe. So for me Europe was always an idealistic idea. I had luncheon actually with Prime Minister Cameron 3 weeks ago, and there was a discussion. There were some of our members, and there was a discussion on Brexit. And I came out. My wife will be a good witness for it. I came home so depressed because the whole discussion for leaving the European Union, the arguments of Prime Minister Cameron were completely rational. Whereas, and you are in the UK, whereas the other side were with Boris Johnson and so on, were mainly running the battle with emotional feelings against, let's say, immigrants and so on. And based on that, because elections are usually won on emotions and not on rational ground, based on that I was convinced that the Brexit vote would prevail. Now with the brutal murder of the MP, who was, by the way, one of our young global leaders, the question has become a very emotional, even on the pro-Europe side. And I think this will be the reason why I'm more optimistic for now for the UK staying in the European Union. Now, the second question was related to
jobs and how
jobs and
lifelong learning and how.
Yeah, lifelong learning. I mean, I coined once one of the let's say contributions, intellectual contributions, was maybe a sentence which I coined once, where I said capitalism will be replaced by talentism.
Yes.
Because capital today is abundant. I mean, if you have a great idea, usually, and you want to create a startup, usually you find the capital. So it's not anymore the most important factor in a global economy or in global competitiveness. What has become crucial is brain power, it's talents. So we will have an economy which will compete mainly on the basis of talents. And talents very much depend on different factors. First, education. And here, when I talk about talents, I speak about talents not only in terms of creating talents, which needs also an education, by the way, which needs also an education which fosters entrepreneurial thinking, which fosters creativity. But talent has to be maintained over a lifelong period. So it's the upskilling, reskilling, which will play a major role. So the World Economic Forum is doing an annual competitiveness report, which you may know, Singapore usually is number 1 or number 2. But I think we are measuring, and we are just in a revision of this report, we are measuring competitiveness in very traditional ways. I think in the future, the educational system, the infrastructure for communications, the infrastructure for entrepreneurial development will be key factors to determine the competitive situation of a country in the global economy.
Excellent, thank you. I'm mindful of the time and also mindful that we have an opportunity here, a very intelligent, learned group of Southeast Asian and East Asian intellectuals, Lee Kuan Yew School students. I wonder if I could ask you either to say your view on how institutions like the World Economic Forum have evolved over these last 40 years and how you see them going forwards and how we in Asia might be able to participate as strongly as possible. What words of advice would you give us?
I mean, when I was nominated professor at the University of Geneva in '73, and I was nominated to head the chair for business policy. You looked at 5 years planning, and you had all the concepts of Professor Drucker and many others. Today, it's very difficult to really predict and even to plan what you should do in the future in a very determinate way. So you need to combine 2 things. It's vision and agility. And it's true for a government, it's true, I would say, for an institution, as you mentioned. It's true, of course, for a company, and it's true for individual lives. I think you have to know in which direction you go. And you have to have a grand vision. It's like a compass which you need, which shows you the direction. But you cannot plan step by step anymore. I think you have to be in a constant learning mode. You have to see, you have to send out radar signals to see how the environment responds to what you are doing, what you have in mind, and then adapt constantly. So in some way you have to need a combination of a compass and a radar system. The compass shows you the direction, but the radar system allows you to move forward in a very agile way and to learn constantly. It's not just when you interact with your environment, people or knowledge sources. I think it's not just to absorb, but really to interact and to be in a constant learning mode, if I use computer language.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. You know, Klaus, we live in a world of mistrust and misunderstanding. I think many of us worry about the civilizational challenge from different parts of the world. We worry about security in the South China Sea. We worry about US-China relations and people talking about the Thucydides trap. You consistently have brought us a vision, not just of optimism, but of action, that we should undertake action, that we can, as you say, make the world a better place. And it is that vision that I took into reading your book, and that I hope everybody else will as well. I want to thank you so much for having been here and for giving us this time. If I could invite you, the audience, to join me in thanking Professor Schwab.
Thank you. Thank you very much.